Waiters of Reddit, what's the worst first date you've ever seen? Well, I didn't technically see it, but it must have been pretty bad. I work at a hospital and I answered a call on the ward from a patient's son. He asked how his mum was going, then asked if I could call him back in a few minutes because he was losing reception. I called him back and a woman answered. I said, hello, this is Damnation 182 from the Reddit hospital. Is XXXX there? She passed the phone over to the same man I spoke to a few minutes earlier and gave him a quick rundown, and he said thank you and hung up. Didn't think anything of it until the next day when I saw the patient's son on the ward. He thanked me for calling him back because he was apparently on the worst date ever, where the woman wouldn't stop talking about her ex-boyfriends, all of their flaws, and how much she hates men. He apparently called from the bathroom, went back and left the phone on the table, then went to the bar to get drinks. I called, the bad date answered, and he told her his mum had been in a car accident and he had to go ASAP. His mum was there for a routine tonsillectomy. Bravo, sir. I was working in a small restaurant with 2 floors. A woman and a man came in and I had a table for them upstairs. It looked like they had a first date because they were asking those getting to know each other questions. After ordering food, the woman had to go to the toilet, which is downstairs. As she walked to the stairs, the food arrived. She walked down, tripped and fell all the way down, knocking her head on the ground. 2 colleagues immediately rushed over to her to see how she was doing. She was unconscious and bleeding from her head, so they called an ambulance. I went to the man while he already started eating and told him his partner didn't know how to call her, fell down the stairs, and that she was unconscious and that an ambulance was on the way. He walked to the stairs, looked down and walked back to his table to finish his food. Later the ambulance arrived and I asked him if he wanted to go with him to the hospital, and he said no while finishing her food as well. It was so awkward, he just sat there for another 45 minutes eating, drinking, paid the bill and left. I still don't know what kind of relationship they had and whether the woman is okay. I definitely have seen a lot of awkward last dates. I used to work at a very small neighborhood restaurant. Everyone that came in was a regular. Most were couples in their 40s 50s out for a quiet dinner, but there was one standout. A very handsome man in his early 30s would come in, it seems, only to break up with women. About twice a month he would come in with a beautiful woman and partway through their meal she would be crying. I always tried to clean the tables near them for as long as possible, but I never heard much of his speech. He always tipped well and was super nice to me and my co-workers. It was just brutal seeing him bring in a new lady and knowing what she was about to go through. Plot twist. He's an oncologist who takes terminally ill patients out for a nice meal to hear their diagnosis. I work in an Italian restaurant. A few years ago I waited on a guy and girl who met for the first time upon arriving at the restaurant. There were awkward pleasantries exchanged at the door and then they were seated. When I was taking their order, the guy asked if we had soup because he had mouth surgery a few days prior and chewing food was still a little rough. We don't have soup. So I explained that the softest food on the menu was gnocchi. He ordered the house gnocchi and proceeded to cut each tiny dumpling into 4 or more pieces and slowly chew each piece. He ate that entire dish over a 3-hour period and the girl stuck it out for the whole thing. She looked miserable and I'm pretty sure they never saw each other again. Man and woman cozy in a booth. Different woman storms in through the front door, literally dragging 2 kids behind her, right past the hostess station to stand defiantly in front of the couple and proceeds to be. Dude was nailed. Oh man, those kids though, I couldn't imagine the terror they had to sit through the rest of the night. Dude would not stop eating her freaking food. Other table actually noticed and we casually people watched the date together. Girl looked miserable. Asked if she wanted the rest of her food boxed up and she said no, but the guy was like actually yes. It was painful. More a story of a non-date. I worked at a cafe and it was a small local chain, so there were 2 other locations in the city. This guy sits down for about an hour and comes up to the counter and asks if we can call around to the other locations to see if this girl was there because they had a date planned and he was sure she must have just gone to the wrong location. We called to the other 2 locations and they said they never saw anyone fitting that description. The guy stuck around for another couple hours, buying 2 more drinks and a sandwich, just waiting until we finally closed for the night. I felt so awful for him. He seemed so crushed. He made a comment to her about how he's not Jew, so she should order whatever she wanted. She was Jewish, Spent the rest of the evening in silence as he went on about how his ex-girlfriend was anorexic and so annoying about food. He was happy to be on a date with a woman who could eat like a normal person. So weird. I work at IHOP. About once a week, 2 middle school early high school age kids come in and sit a table away from each of their parents and kiss and hug each other excessively. One time I think the guy was getting a handy underneath the table. The parents just maintain conversation and pretend not to notice. The kid is also a huge served a couple a few months ago. Every time I walked over, he would always be the one talking, and she would just be sitting there not having a good time. At the end I asked if it was one bill or separate and she immediately piped up separate. I go and take his payment, and as I hand over the debit machine to the girl, I see the guy take his phone out and start swiping through Tinder. I was bartending in NY and watched this couple that had met on Tinder have their first date sitting at my bar. The girl was a complete maniac. Kept bringing up the fact that the dude she was with could be a psychopath and could murder her. He had given no indication of this, and went on Tinder while he was still sitting beside her at the bar. Kept telling him he was lucky that she agreed to meet him at all and she didn't think he'd be this boring. She ordered about 5 or 6 lits and several shots. He literally just had 2 beers. She made him pay for everything. My favorite part of this crap show was that he excused himself to go to the bathroom and left through the fire escape. Absolutely brilliant. To be clear, there was only one official entrance and exit. This dude escaped out the back and she went searching for him. Straight up thought he had disapparated out of the bar. Had an obvious first date where the lady was grilling the guy on how much money he makes and he didn't really want to answer. It was awkward serving steak and salad during an interrogation. Olive Garden. Around 2014 or so, from like 7:30, close on a weeknight. Middle-aged man of sub-average attractiveness was sitting alone at a table with a glass of water, insisting that his date would be just a few minutes. There's traffic. At around 9:15, manager had to come out and let him know that the restaurant would close at 10, and if he'd like to place a food order, he should probably do it now. He ordered a bruschetta appetizer, and said again that his date was on her way and they'd order when she got there. 9:45. This beautiful woman walks in and awkwardly stands by his table. I couldn't hear the conversation they had, but the man then asked for a box for the appetizer and they wound up leaving together without her even sitting down. I was working at a Mexican restaurant at the time. I was waiting on a couple and I could tell it was a first date by the questions I heard them asking each other. Anyway, towards the end of their meal there was this Hispanic girl sweeping next to their table and the woman looks at her, holds out the remains on her plate and says, "Would you like to take this home to feed your kids?" I stood there in complete shock. This woman spoke no English, but she could tell this random woman was completely degrading her. The sad thing is she seemed like she really thought she was doing a good deed. Her date looked so embarrassed. I used to work at a little crappy diner place. Definitely not the type of place to bring a first date. There was this guy who'd come in every Friday with a different girl. He was a very good looking dude and was always super polite and very nice to me, but he was super awkward. The girls would look kind of skeptical as they walked in, probably because of the crappy diner scene. Every week, about halfway through the meal, like clockwork, the girls would develop these get me the frick outta here faces. That's when I would bring the check. They always boxed up their food and left right away. I had the chance to talk to one of them while he was in the restroom. Apparently he wasn't harmful. There was just something off about him that the girls didn't like. His persistence is on point though. Once witnessed a date where the dude talked about how special he was and how his mind wasn't like other people's for the entire date. The girl was politely nodding along and every time she tried to get a word in, he'd cut her off. Absolutely brutal. I'm sure he thought the date went wonderful too. I work at a Japanese restaurant and one couple comes to mind. It was the worst for everyone else involved. We offered private rooms that have sliding doors, and this couple clearly was hitting off very well, to the point that after a few drinks, she had moved to his side of the table and they just went at each other's faces and bodies for about 2 hours. They could have done all that with the doors closed and it would have been less cringy. Still cringy nonetheless. But no, the sliding doors were wide open for all the patrons to see. Kids, big groups of people, wait staff, runners, etc. If I remember correctly, they tipped pretty bad too, so it was not a fun time. A guy got stood up. He then drank a magnum bottle of red wine, 8 glasses of wine, and ate 3 apps out of depression. His date called him and he started cussing her out. He asked for more wine and then I had to cut him off. So he got up and tried to run out of the restaurant with a bottle he grabbed from a rack. An off-duty cop tackled him in the lobby and then he crapped his pants in front of everyone waiting for a table. He lied there screaming with the guy holding him down until the cops arrived and arrested him. This is my fondest memory of being a bartender at Olive Garden. I work at a country club that is up to its ears in old money that uses said old money to make more new money. The membership fees cost more than a year at my university. To say money is not an issue there would be an understatement. Anyways, I was serving a young couple and the power imbalance was phenomenal. She was the daughter of one of the board members and the entire staff knew her. Read. Her father's club account was major money, and the gent, well, he wasn't a member, and certainly looked like he was just the average broke college student. He was wearing plain but nice clothes and she was dressed to the nines in fashion. The date seemed to go smoothly enough, nothing out of the ordinary, until she gets up and leaves the table before I have brought out the bill. I bring the bill to the counter, knowing it is well over $300 worth of food and drinks, all things she insisted on ordering. 2 bottles of top shelf wine, neither finished, 2 steaks. When he asked for the chicken and she insisted on him eating steak like a man, and he solemnly goes to pull out his wallet and starts tearing up apologizing that he won't be able to tip. I mean, I've never had a customer cry over not being able to tip. And he further explained he was a server too and that she didn't know he wasn't rich and she left because he had told her about his scholarship. I was flabbergasted and kindly reminded him that at this country club we do not take credit cards nor cash. We only charge to accounts. And so her father got a hefty bill. Rest assured he signed a handsome tip to me in her name. It was entirely satisfying. Last I heard her father cut her off. I can't help but smile at all the life lessons she is learning, like working to go on dates. Worked at Applebee's. This woman was the worst woman I've ever waited on. She was needy and slurped down her iced tea like there was a worldwide shortage. He was silent. He didn't talk once except to order his quesadilla burger, and she just kept going and going prattling on. And she was mean too, talking down about how people were losers to be servers, and how much better it was to work in a shop. At the end, he went to the bathroom and just never came back. He apparently jetted out the side door where the to-go girls worked and gave them a 20 to give to me. Worst woman was just sitting there and waiting for him to come back. I stood there at the service station just waiting for her to realize he wasn't coming back. So after 10 minutes, she just started crying, pushes her chair over, and flounced out. I didn't get a tip, but it made my night. So there was this couple on a first date, seated at a table in the back. At first I didn't think much of it, wasn't even aware that it was a first date until the restaurant's phone rang. A man called to let me know his son was there on his very first date ever. The son was in his late 20s. Obviously this was a big deal to him and he called the restaurant to make sure we would do our best to make sure they have a pleasant evening. My boss heard and instantly went to the kitchen in order to make sure they would get a special treatment. What followed was plates with rose petals, red hearts, etc. etc. Way over the top. When serving the plates my boss even mentioned the phone call. To finish it off the dessert came complete with fireworks and all that. The idea was sweet, but obviously this was way too much for a first date of 2 people who were basically just getting to know each other. As the evening progressed the girl was visually put off by my boss trying too hard. Poor guy. Up until then he had been doing quite well. The pair seemed to have a lovely evening. Until my try-hard boss entered the scene, that is. The girl was polite towards the end of their date, but it was obvious there was not going to be a second date. And it wasn't even the guy's fault. Other people ruined it for him. I felt so sorry for that dude. I once had a guy come sit at my bar who was waiting for his blind date. He orders a couple of drinks to calm his nerves. Well, he probably should have slowed it down to keep his mouth from working faster than his brain. Inaho, she shows up and is way out of his league. She is absolutely beautiful. She orders a drink and they start talking. I come back to check on them and I hear him talking about how much he hates children. He was saying things like how he hopes he never has any, and that he will never be stuck taking care of them, and how he wishes that kids couldn't be taken into public places so that he wouldn't have to be around them. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "Well, I have a daughter, and I love her very much." She grabbed her purse and walked out on him. The look on his face was absolutely priceless. I work at a fairly nice Italian restaurant, where we do a lot of business. One night a man who I was not even serving came up to me while I was punching an order in on the computer and hands me $20 and a napkin with a phone number on it. He proceeds to tell me I am on the worst date of my life. This woman is horrendous and I have to get out of here. Take this $20 and please go to the nearest phone and call me and tell me that I have to get home right away. I don't care what excuse you make up. I just gotta get the heck out of here. Initially I thought he was kidding until 2 minutes later the guy who was serving him came up to me to tell me how wicked this woman was and how he could tell the guy didn't wanna be there. I promptly called that guy as soon as I had a free minute. One of my shining achievements as a server. It was one of my first dates where the waiter definitely could sense the awkwardness. I was a junior in high school. I had been flirting with a senior for a couple months and asked her out the day I got my license. I picked her up from her house and within 1 minute of being in the car she got a phone call. One of her best friends died of a brain aneurysm earlier that day. I told her that we could delay the date and offered to take her home, but she declined and insisted we carry on. We get to the restaurant and she is crying at the table. I didn't say any words to her other than "Are you okay?" the whole date because she was either texting her group of friends or couldn't make out words due to being so hysterical. The waiter kept coming by and sensed how awkward I was feeling. Out of all my restaurant experiences, I have never received my entree in checks so fast. The waiter was a true bro. Here's Bob Ross holding a baby raccoon to brighten your day. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe and comment. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.